14 kidnapped victims are back in safety after Nigerian troops reportedly foiled an attempted abduction in Zamfara state. The operation took place around Magazu village in Tisafe local government area, where troops of Sector 2, Operation Fansanyama, moved against armed attackers following credible intelligence about their movements. The attackers reportedly came prepared to abduct more people, but this time, the security forces were already waiting. And what happened next forced the attackers to abandon their vehicle and disappear into the surrounding bushes. A follow-up search by the troops then uncovered the victims. 14 kidnapped people were rescued, but there is more to this operation than the number of people rescued, because the incident raises a much bigger question about Nigeria's continued struggle with kidnapping and armed banditry. Can intelligence-led military operations finally begin to prevent these attacks before innocent people are taken? According to Daily Post, the troops received credible intelligence about the movements of armed attackers around Magazu village. Rather than waiting for the suspected kidnappers to complete their operation, the troops moved into the area and engaged them. The confrontation reportedly forced the attackers to abandon their vehicle and flee into the bushes. But the troops did not stop after the attackers escaped. They launched a follow-up search of the surrounding area. That search proved crucial. The soldiers located 14 kidnapped victims and brought them to safety. One of the victims, however, has sustained gunshot wounds during the incident. The injured victim was evacuated to General Hospital, Tisafe, where medical attention was provided. Fortunately, no security personnel were reported injured. And that detail matters, because every successful rescue operation comes with risk for the officers involved. The troops were dealing with armed attackers in an environment where the criminals had the advantage of knowing the surrounding terrain. Yet, the security forces were able to intervene, disrupt the planned adoption, and rescue the victims. Security analyst Bakitson, whose post on X provided details of the operation, commended the troops for their swift response, courage, and the professionalism. But while the rescue is certainly significant, it also exposes the uncomfortable reality of insecurity in parts of Zamfara. For years, communities across the northwest have faced attacks from armed groups involving in banditry, kidnapping, and other criminal activities. The consequences go far beyond the victims who are physically adopted. Entire communities can become trapped in fear. Farmers may stop going to their farms. Parents worry about their children traveling to school. Businesses can suffer. Road users can become targets. And families can spend days, weeks, or even longer waiting for the safe return of relatives. This is why intelligence has become one of the most important weapons in Nigeria's fight against insecurity. Weapons and troops are necessary, but knowing where an armed group is moving before it reaches its targets can make the difference between an attack succeeding and an attack being stopped. The Zamfara operation appears to demonstrate precisely that principle. Credible intelligence was reportedly received. Troops responded. The suspected attackers were confronted. Their vehicle was abandoned, and the victims were found. But there is another side to this story. The attackers escaped, and that means the operation may not be completely finished. The immediate objective of rescuing the victims was achieved, but the longer-term objective must be to identify those responsible and prevent them from returning to the same area. The abandoned vehicle could potentially become an important piece of evidence. Investigators may be able to examine it for information that could help identify the attackers or establish connections to wider criminal networks. The rescue victims may also be able to provide information about their captors, their movements, and where they were being held. This is where intelligence gathering and law enforcement must work together. A military operation can disrupt an armed group, But dismantling a kidnapping network requires more. It requires identifying the financiers. It requires tracing weapons. It requires understanding communication networks. And it requires going after the people who provide logistics and support. Otherwise, the same criminals can disappear into remote areas, regroup, and return. And this brings us the larger challenge facing Nigeria. How does the country move from responding to attacks to preventing attacks? That transition is critical. Rescuing 14 victims is a major success. But imagine if those 14 people had never been adopted in the first place. That would be an even greater victory. Prevention requires intelligence networks that reach deep into vulnerable communities. It requires residents to feel safe enough to report suspicious activity. It requires rapid communication between intelligence agencies and operational forces. It requires security agencies to respond quickly when credible information arrives. There is also the question of terrain. Many areas affected by banditry contain forests, rural roads, and difficult terrain that can provide hiding places for criminal groups. Security forces therefore face an enormous challenge, but technology can potentially help. Surveillance, intelligence analysis, communication systems, and other modern security tools can provide the ability of authorities to detect and track criminal movements. At the same time, local communities remain essential. Residents often know their environments better than anyone else. They know unusual movements. They recognize unfamiliar faces. They understand the routes criminals may use. But they need to trust that reporting such information will not put their own life at risk. That trust must be protected, because without cooperation between communities and security forces, intelligence becomes much harder to obtain. The Zamfara rescue therefore offers two different messages. The first is encouraging. 14 people who were in captivity have been rescued. An attempted adoption was disrupted. One injured victim has been taken for medical care, and no security personnel were reportedly injured. But the second message is more troubling. Armed attackers were still able to move through the area with the intention of carrying out an adoption. That means the threat remains, and the government cannot afford to measure success only by the number of operations conducted. The real measure of success is whether communities become safer. Can people move freely? Can farmers return to their fields? Can families sleep without fear? Can criminals be denied the ability to adopt people in the first place? Those are the questions Nigerians ultimately want answered. The troops involved in this operation deserve recognition for responding to intelligence and rescuing the victims. But the responsibility does not end with one successful operation. Security agencies must continue the pursuit of the attackers. They must investigate the abandoned vehicle. They must gather information from the rescued victims. And they must work to prevent the same criminal network from carrying out another attack, because every rescue victim represents a life saved, and every prevented kidnapping represents a family spared from fear, uncertainty, and potential tragedy. The latest operation in Tasefe shows that timely intelligence and rapid military action can make a difference. But one successful rescue cannot solve Zamfara's wider security crisis. The challenge is to turn individual successes into sustained security. Nigeria needs operations that do not simply react after criminals strike, but anticipate their movements and disrupt their plans before victims are taken. For the 14 people rescued in this operation, the story has a hopeful ending. They are alive, they are free, and one injured victim is receiving medical treatment. But for Zamfara, the larger battles continues. The question now is simple. Will authorities be able to maintain this level of intelligence-led response and eventually prevent armed groups from operating freely in vulnerable communities? Because stopping one kidnapping attempt is important, but stopping the next one before it begins is the real test. What do you think? Is intelligence-led military action the key to defeating kidnapping in Zamfara? Or does Nigeria need a much broader security strategy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for more updates on Nigeria's security situation, stay with us on First News. I'm Chidera Isom. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next reports.